Hello, everybody. My name's Owen Lee from HR Champions. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but as you can see, we've recorded this. What I wanted to do today was talk to you about discrimination and recruitment. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the protected characteristics in the Equality Act, some hints and tips around that, look at positive action, look at unconscious bias, look at some technology that may be able to help you in unconscious bias. And then finally, before we do hints and tips, is just talk to you about a couple of noteworthy employment cases that provide some learning. So the main thing is, and the bottom line is that in any recruitment process, right from start to end, you've got to make sure that you don't discriminate against anybody, and that you choose the best candidate for the job, regardless of any protected characteristics that that individual may or may not have. And in order to do that, you will need to follow a fair, open and transparent process. You need to keep records, so records of notes, tests, the whole plethora of information, because that type of record can be subject to a disclosure at a subsequent employment tribunal if someone believes that they have been treated unfairly during your process. Now, I'm not saying that you've got to keep your records in perpetuity, but you should keep them for at least 3 months, because 3 months for those rejected candidates, 3 months is the time for someone to bring a tribunal case. Throughout your recruitment process, be aware of any unconscious biases either you or any other line manager that involved in this process could have, because those things are important, and I'll talk about those a bit later. So, as I said, you need to be proactive in making sure you avoid discrimination right away through the process, right from the very start. So even when you are considering your job description and your specification, as Chloe has already spoken about earlier on, then be careful. For example, you may decide that the requirement of the job is for someone to start at 7:30 in the morning. Now, unless you've got a very good business reason for doing that, then that in itself could be indirectly discriminating against females. Because whether we like it or not, the court's view that women take most of the child caring responsibilities in the UK, and therefore if you're asking or requiring someone to start at 7:30 in the morning without a really good business reason, that could impact on preparing children for school, etc., and that could be indirectly discriminatory. Be careful about some of the words you're using. So energetic, which in itself seems quite nice, but could be discriminatory against disabled people. When you're talking about experience in numbers of years, then potentially you are looking at age discrimination. I loved the bubble writing advert. I saw that in a shop window in Monmouth just before Christmas, and took a photograph of that. So phone girl needed. Why isn't it phone person or anyone else? Why is it phone girl? Often in a recruitment process, you may be requiring candidates to take psychometric tests. It's not unusual for candidates to be asked to take numeric or verbal reasoning tests. What happens if you've got a candidate that's dyscalculic or dyslexic? Then you will need to make reasonable adjustments for them so that they can perform to their best ability in that test. The next one I want to show you, this is an actual CV that was in a recruitment process by a company earlier summer last year. This recruitment process was done completely on LinkedIn, and in that process, the company did not see that disability disclosure, and that was not through any fault from them, but it was the technology and the algorithm that LinkedIn used for whatever reason. that disability disclosure was not apparent to that company. So, of course, as soon as this disability disclosure was pointed out to them by the candidate, they offered that candidate the opportunity to make an oral submission in terms of supporting a potential application. So take care, because you can be caught out. So when it comes to protected characteristics, then you can ask questions about them. You can gather information about them for a number of reasons. So the first is, as I've already said, that in any interview process, in communications with candidates, particularly when you're inviting them to take tests or come to interview, make sure you ask them if they require any reasonable adjustments so that they can perform at their best at the interview. You may be an organisation that asks and monitors equality and diversity information, and you can ask candidates to complete those forms. Those are normally completed anonymously, but you may or may not have that. You may or may not have the need to store that type of information. The other area that you can comment or ask questions around protected characteristics if it's a crucial or critical for the job. So let me give you an example. You're in a caring situation, you're in a care home, the residents in that home are all elderly females, and their desire is that carers, because of the intimacy in that relationship, are only females. Those residents do not want, for whatever reason, a male carer to cater for their intimate needs. And therefore, in that situation, it would be appropriate to say that you have to be a female for that type of stuff. And then finally, this is positive action. So you're taking positive action so that you can increase, or you've got a better chance of increasing the diversity of your organisation of any disadvantaged or underrepresented group. And I'll come back to positive action shortly. Now, why do you want to take positive action, if you like? And the business case for ensuring that your organisation is diverse, it's compelling. This data comes from McKinsey, okay, it's a couple of years out of date, and only looks at gender and ethnic diversity. But you can see that organisations with greater gender and ethnic diversity outperform those that are not so diverse in those two dimensions. So there is a compelling business case, and there's also social, societal, moral obligation as well for you to do something about your diversity and inclusion. Not least, corporate shareholders are all over this in terms of forcing companies to be better representatives or have a better representation of the community which they serve. So a compelling business case for diversity and its impact on the bottom line and your business performance. And as Kathy and Kieran have also intimated, that those potential recruits in generations Y and Z, look for this type of thing. So there's another reason for you to improve your employer branding. If you can say that you're certainly a diverse and inclusive organisation. So what can you do to do that? And that is positive action. And we will see that a number of companies take positive action to try and increase their diversity. And what they do is that they go out into the community, into schools, colleges, they engage with charitable organisations. They use their employees to go to communities and enthuse them about the opportunities in their company. They encourage them to apply for those opportunities. And more often than not, they provide coaching and support. So when it comes to the recruitment process, these people have a better chance of being the best candidate on the day. So it's about building skills, building confidence. So when it comes down to that recruitment process, the chances of these people performing well and therefore getting the job is improved. You may have seen this just before Christmas. This is the American investment bank State Street. They have decided, in terms of their diversity agenda, to target their most senior and middle managers. So they've given them targets to increase the diversity in State Street. Now, on the face of it, that seems to be a laudable aspiration and a laudable way of doing things. But in reality, if you are bonusing people to do this with a financial reward on the end of it, are you driving the right behavior? Are you forcing, through this bonus scheme, your people to make recruitment decisions to increase diversity, and those decisions are not based on the best candidate on the day for that job? So that's a question. Whether it's right or not, I don't know. But just take care. I now want to talk about unconscious bias. So unconscious bias takes a number of forms. Now here's a few little examples. So lookism or beauty bias. This is where you're more likely to appoint candidates that are so-called good-looking. How do you overcome that? Well, first of all, you take any photographs of candidates off CVs or other material. Maybe your initial sifting is through just telephone interviews, so you're not actually seeing what the candidate looks like. Affinity bias. This is where you tend to prefer people that have similarities to yourself. Maybe they went to the same school, they have the same interests and hobbies, they came from the same background as you, so you unconsciously prefer those types of people who don't have similar affinities with you. Halo and horn. So halo is similar to affinity bias in a way. So an example would be, well, look, we're doing graduate recruitment. I think graduates from Russell Group universities are much better candidates than other universities. So candidates from Russell Group universities, you unconsciously put those on a pedestal above others. Or horn, which is more of a negative thing. For example, someone who is overweight, or a candidate is overweight, you have negative views of those type of overweight people, and therefore you have an unconscious bias against them. This one was interesting to me, that it extends to names. So candidates with minority identified names being less likely to be have callbacks and job offers. And I would challenge you to think, certainly for those of you who are parents, before your children were born, when you have those discussions with your partner about what sort of names should we use, I'm sure, like me, you probably came up with some names for whatever reason. You said, absolutely, I'm not going to call my child that. So think about that. Carefully consider your processes and your tools so that you minimize the risk of unconscious bias. And there's some very practical things that you can do. Here's one from Intel. Just by having diverse recruitment interview panels, they managed to increase the diversity of their organization by having people involved in the process from diverse and different backgrounds. And it has a positive impact on what they're trying to achieve. The other thing you can do is technology. And what I want to do is introduce you to Tengai. So bear with me here while I just transfer you to a video.
This is Tengai. She's a robot that's been programmed to carry out job interviews, and unlike humans, she doesn't have any unconscious biases. I can communicate with her using this microphone, although at the moment she only speaks Swedish.
Fjärde frågan är: berätta om arbetssituation då du upplevt det svårt att samarbeta med kollegor i ett team eller projekt.
Why do you think Tengai could be better at carrying out interviews than humans?
Well, Tengai doesn't have any unconscious bias, for example. As you know, we make presumptions when we first meet each other. It takes about 7 seconds for someone to make a first impression, and we want to challenge that.
Is there not a possibility, though, that Tengai could also end up developing unconscious biases?
We work with experts on the area of validity, and we also check the code and analyze the code throughout the process.
Tengai is currently learning English, and the idea is that she'll be able to help employers outside of Sweden by the end of this year or early next year. Isn't that right, Tengai?
Yes. Hello, BBC viewers. Maybe I'll be interviewing you sometime soon.
Watch this space.
So Tengai, an interesting development. If you were a candidate and you pitched up to an interview and then were interviewed by a bot, that might be a bit of a surprise. But having said that, for those of you who have children, or for those of you who are recent graduates, you will see that the use of bots and technology is certainly happening in the graduate recruitment sphere. Not least because they have to deal with the sheer volume of candidates they're having to deal with. So we'll see how it's developing, but I'm sure we will see more and more of this. I now want to talk to you about just two noteworthy cases. And the first one involves a guy called Raymond Levy, and that's against commercial lawyers, McHale. So McHale advertised the position. They advertised it that they wanted 5 years post-qualification experience. And Mr. Levy saw this. He phoned McHale's and they very quickly invited him to an interview. At the interview, they started to discuss salary. And the salary was in the region of 50 to 60k. After the interview, they told him that he would be contacted, and the interviewer went away and they had a discussion internally. And then they were phoned Mr. Levy and told him that he hadn't been successful in the job because they wanted a requirement for a more junior person with 3 to 5 years post-qualification experience. Mr. Levy smelt a rat, brought a case and to the tribunal. And of course, in that process, McHale's needed to disclose all the documentation. So the sort of things that were seen was notes in the interview, notes and comments such as expensive, doesn't cover all our needs. Also, there were questions about, well, why did you advertise the role with 5 years PQE, and then you're suddenly changing to 3 to 5 years PQE? And the outcome of all this was that the tribunal did find that Mr. Levy had been discriminated against, because in the end of the day, he met all the requirements of the role. And so there's some interesting learning through this. And this is going right back to what Chloe was saying. At the very start, make sure you're very clear about the requirements of your role. In this case, they initially published a need for someone with 5 years PQE, and then they suddenly change it to 3 to 5 years. They talk about salary. They talk about being 50 to 60k, and then it seems that was going to be more expensive. So make sure that you get all your collateral properly and robustly sorted at the start. Ensure that you are clear about your job requirements and that you are consistent with those throughout. Otherwise, you may well trip up. And the second case is Mrs. Ryan in the Southwest Ambulance Service. The Southwest Ambulance Service, which is not unusual for larger organisations to have a talent pool. So a talent pool is that they're thinking about succession for critical roles or the most senior roles, and people in the talent pool have some focused development and training and some focused attention to try and develop them and look after them for potentially those most senior roles or critical skill roles. In the case of Southwest Ambulance, all the employees were given the opportunity to self-nominate for the talent pool. Mrs. Ryan chose not to, and then an opportunity became available, and Mrs. Ryan wanted to apply for it, but she was told that she couldn't apply for it because it was going to be open to the talent pool first, and it was only if no candidate from the talent pool was appointed to the role would she have the opportunity to apply. Mrs. Ryan, who was over 55, took a case to the tribunal claiming indirect age discrimination. So, i.e., she was over 55. Over 55s were underrepresented in the talent pool. And because she was over 55 and not a member of the talent pool, she didn't have the opportunity to apply for this. The finding from the initial tribunal was that there was no discrimination, and that was based on the fact that all employees had the opportunity to self-nominate themselves for the talent pool. She chose not to, therefore she took themselves out of the equation. Mrs. Ryan didn't like that. And took it to appeal. And the Employment Appeal Tribunal did find that she was discriminated against, irrespective of the fact that she didn't self-nominate for the talent pool, and therefore she was disadvantaged. And because she was over 55, she was discriminated against. So, if you have a talent pool, make sure that there's clarity around how that talent pool operates. I think self-nomination is a nice thing and a good thing to have. But I think if you've got opportunities, then open them out to everybody, irrespective if they are in the talent pool or not, so that everybody has an equal opportunity to apply for that job. The two interesting cases. And finally, before I hand back to Kathy, some hints and tips. So remember unconscious bias. Are you aware of any biases that you may have? It is very good practice that when you sift, and in your interview, in your recruitment process, you do blind sifts, so that all data such as names, dates of birth, dates they've attended college and all this sort of things are taken out and redacted so that you're not influenced by that. Widen your search. So search from the widest scope that you possibly can. Think about your schools, colleges, universities, or some of the things that Kathy was saying earlier, which is similar to about building and creating connections. Particularly if you're dealing with huge volumes of recruitment, you may wish to consider technology. Kathy's and Chloe have already mentioned Breathe HR, but maybe there'll be something like Tengai to look at. And certainly if you're using things like LinkedIn, remember that case earlier where that disability disclosure from a candidate was not apparent. It's always good practice to involve more than one person in the recruitment process so that you get second opinions, you get challenges, you get different views. And finally, be open-minded. And if you do all of those things, then you can ensure that you reduce your risk of discrimination claims, you have a fair and robust process, and you pick the best candidate on the day. So thank you very much. Let me now hand over to Kathy.